everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather and today I am here to tell you about all of the books that I rated 5 stars in 2022. Now please bear in mind that I read 150 books in 2022 and a lot of them were really wonderful. However, I wanted to keep this list pretty short, so instead of my favorite books of 2022, I thought I would tell you about the ones that I rated 5 stars because that is fairly unusual for me. So my first 5-star read of the year was Hana Khan Carries On by Uzma Jalaluddin. This was incredible. I loved her first book, Aisha at Last, which is a Pride and Prejudice retelling. This one, however, is not a retelling. As far as I can tell, it is a completely original storyline. It still takes place within the, I believe, Toronto Muslim community. And Hana Khan works at a radio station. She's trying to work her way out of the entry-level jobs, but she just can't get there. But she also runs her own podcast. And she and this mysterious listener have been exchanging messages for a really long time, and she feels really close to this person, even though she has no idea who they are. Then, at the same time, her mother owns this particular restaurant, and it is about to be shut down or at least put into severe competition with a new up-and-coming bougie halal restaurant that this man and his father are trying to put in. Hana hates this man on sight for everything that he stands for and everything that he's trying to do to her family's restaurant. And due to conventional romance tropes, you can kind of see where that is going to go. And that was the bit that I did see coming. However, how Uzma Jalaluddin executes that is beautiful. And besides which, there are so many more beautiful moments in this book and so many really hard moments where she touches on mental health, what it's like to be an immigrant, Islamophobia, well-intentioned but still racist things that happen in the workplace. Everything is so perfect and so necessary. I absolutely loved it. I was on such an emotional high when I finished it. I really highly recommend it. My next 5-star read was The Animals at Lockwood Manor by Jane Healey. This is the story of a young woman who is sent with a colleague and with a load of taxidermied animals from the British Museum to Lockwood Manor to keep them safe from the Blitz. Lockwood Manor is owned by this very mysterious older man and his daughter, who is even more mysterious. And then strange things start happening with the animals, and our heroine may be falling for the daughter. There is so much in here. There's so much going on in here. I don't remember the overall plot, but I remember specific moments in this book so vividly, which is a true feat. Besides which, it is just the perfect example of a Gothic novel. It feels very much in the same vein as Charlotte Bronte, Daphne du Maurier. It was just a fantastically gripping read. Then my next 2 5-star reads came in April, and the first one was The Lost Shuttle by Max Gross. This is a wonderful book. It is a deeply unsettling book for a number of reasons. There is a high rate of anti-Semitism in this book. Here's why. The whole focus of the book is on this shtetl, this little Jewish village that has been kind of forgotten about by the rest of the world. It's in the middle of the forest in Poland. No one knows it's there. And they have had no contact with the outside world either. Until one day, this one young married couple has been having massive issues. And one day they both go missing. And the rest of the village is terrified as to what might have happened to them both. So they send this young man out saying, go to this city, because they know that's the nearest city. and start asking around for her to make sure that she's okay, and will comb the forest. Okay. So off he goes, and he comes in contact with the modern world. And that's where he encounters so much anti-Semitism. And it's horrible to read about. But at the same time, it's so important to highlight that this is still going on. Things that I did not realize. I mean, you do hear about it here in the States, but to hear about it happening in a country that directly experienced World War II and all of its horrors is doubly upsetting, and thus makes it doubly necessary to show that and talk about it so that we can do something about it, hopefully. It also deals with religious tradition and tradition in general, and how much do you hang on to, how much do you give up for the sake of progress and modernity? Is that worth it? There are so many fascinating thoughts in here. I would highly recommend you read this book. My other 5-star read from that month is Hamlet by Maggie O'Farrell. Everyone has read this book and loved it, so I don't feel like I need to tell you too much more about it. It is, of course, about the Shakespeare family and when their son Hamlet died, and the effect that it has on the entire family. I expected to love it because I love Shakespeare so much. I did not expect the writing to be so beautiful, so gripping, so moving. Honestly, you don't have to love Shakespeare to love this book. It is truly about family, about grief, about healing. It is so wonderful. Do pick it up. My next 5-star reads came in June, and the first was The Secret Lives of Church Ladies by Disha Philyaw. This was incredible. It's a collection of short stories about women of color and the influence that the church has or doesn't have on their ideas about sex and love and relationships, and they are just fabulous. Each short story is so interesting and looks at another facet, another way that those elements could combine in someone's life. I still remember a lot of these short stories really vividly, which doesn't often happen for me with short stories. But Disha Philyaw made each one of them so individual and so memorable that it was really beautiful, and I highly encourage you to pick this up. Another 5-star book that I read in June was ExLibris by Anne Fadiman. And this is subtitled Confessions of a Common Reader. And it's exactly that. It's Anne Fadiman reflecting on her life as a reader. Things that she read and things that she thought about books and organization of books when she was a child, all the way through adulthood, meeting her husband, moving in together, having to merge their book collections, and then them having a child as well. And bridging the gaps of, do you write in your books? Do you not write in your books? Do you mangle them? Do you keep them neat and pristine? All of these things that all of us bookish people know and understand. And that's what makes it really special, is even if you don't agree with her on some of those points, you can still identify so heavily with the love that she has for books. It's a really short, really wonderful read. I would highly recommend this. Of course, I highly recommend all of these books. I gave them 5 stars. And the last 5-star book that I read in June was My Policeman by Bethan Roberts. This was such a moving book, such an intriguing book. Of course, you've all heard about and possibly seen the film with Emma Corrin and Harry Styles and the other actor who I've seen in lots of stuff whose name escapes me. But I would highly encourage you to read the book as well, purely because the structure is so interesting. It's about a young woman and a young man who both fall in love with a policeman in England in the 1950s, I want to say, when homosexuality was still illegal, and how the three of them navigate their relationships. That right there is pretty fascinating, But what I also loved was the structure. In part of the story, you hear from Marion and you get her perspective on events. Then once you know a certain portion of that, you flip over and you get Patrick's version of events. And that fills in some gaps. But the fascinating thing is they never talk. You never hear from Tom himself. You never hear from their policeman. You just hear their ideas about him and what they experienced with him or around him, which just gives a whole other layer to this story, as imagining what would Tom say if he could respond. And that's what made it really fascinating for me, apart from it being beautifully written as well. In July, of course, it was Jane Austen July, so I reread some of Jane Austen's works, which are automatic 5 stars, but we're not talking about rereads here, we're talking about new things that I read. So my one 5-star new read in July was The Particular Charm of Miss Jane Austen by Ada Bright and Cass Grafton. This is an incredible book. It is not particularly beautifully written in terms of it having lyrical, gorgeous, sensuous prose. It doesn't do that. It's very plain, straightforward writing. But it's the plot and the themes that really, really grab me. So it's about a young woman, Rose, who's in her 20s, living and working in Bath. And she has made an online friendship with Morgan over the years through their shared love of Jane Austen. And this September, Morgan is finally coming to visit from the US. They will meet in person for the first time and go to the Jane Austen Festival together. That happens in Bath every year. That is a real thing. You can do it. However, as they're going through the festival, they start seeing this mysterious woman who's behaving as though she belongs in the Regency. And then through a series of events, they discover that it is Jane Austen. And through some rather surprising time traveling, she becomes stuck in the 21st century, which means that her novels have never been written. And you get to see what effect that has on Rose's life as she tries desperately to find a way to return Jane to her time period so that we don't lose those works. This book raised such emotions for me. First of all, if you are here on BookTube or online in any way, you will know what it is like to make an online friend through that shared passion that the two of you have. And then to be so nervous about meeting them in person, and will it be the same as when you see them online, or will it be totally awkward and it's going to be a mess? I felt that anxiety so much, having been through it with some of my online friends. Plus having to confront a world without Jane Austen's works and thinking about what would it mean for me? What direction would my life have taken if her novels never existed was just heartbreaking and anxiety-inducing. I don't want to think about a world without them. And that to me was what made this book so magical. It is sweet and cozy and lovely while giving you really deep emotions and hitting you right in the feels. If you are an Austen lover, if you have made online friendships and you know how special those are, read this book. I then read an arc, which I gave 5 stars to, which is pretty rare. And that was Phaedra by Laura Shepperson? Yes, Laura Shepperson. Even more surprisingly, this was a debut novel from her, which is truly incredible. And it is a retelling of Phaedra from Greek mythology. She was the younger sister of Ariadne, who, after Theseus abandoned Ariadne on the island of Naxos, he went and married her younger sister, Phaedra. And she had her own dealings with men and misogyny, sexism, all of that. What I loved about this book was not only how her story was handled, which is handled heartbreakingly well, and it is so powerful, especially nowadays as we are still fighting for women's bodily autonomy, for women to be heard and believed in the face of powerful men. But you also hear from other women around her. You hear from Medea, you hear from the maids in the palace as one chorus-like voice, and it all comes together. It is just so powerful and so beautifully done. I'm really intrigued to see what else Laura Shepperson decides to do. And according to Goodreads, that should be coming out in early 2023, in either January or February. Although I believe in the UK it's called The Heroines, which is a title that I think fits it much better, given that you hear from such a wide range of voices, not just Phaedra's. But either way, it was a fantastic look at something that is still frighteningly going on today. Then at the end of August, I read The Mirror and the Light, the play version. I had read the full-length novel, but I had not read the play version, and from what I can find online, it is not going to be coming to New York anytime soon. Which is sad, because I got to see the first two and I really loved them, so I would love for this to transfer to New York at some point. This is the play adaptation of Hilary Mantel's last novel about the life of Thomas Cromwell in the court of Henry VIII, and it was fascinating. I have to say, I did find her last novel a bit of a slog, and I know a lot of people just cannot handle her writing style. They find it far too dense, far too literary. So if you have those troubles, I would highly recommend reading the play versions of all of her novels, because they do exist. I have all three. What I love about them is they boil things down to just dialogue, and they still give you so much in terms of character development, in terms of the history surrounding everything that is going on. It's much easier to sort out who is who, and sometimes boiling things down to that simple level, if you deliver one line, it becomes really powerful. I also love that Ben Miles co-wrote this script with Hilary Mantel, because he had grown so close to Cromwell as a character after playing him for a good couple of years. And to me, I think he was a better Cromwell than Mark Rylance. I love Mark Rylance, don't get me wrong, but I have read, and I agree, that Ben Miles's portrayal was closer to Hilary Mantel's idea of Cromwell, a far more physically present and occasionally violent person. It was just wonderful. I really loved reading it. I hope I get to see it one day, but it was a fabulous reading experience. And finally, my final 5-star read was in December of this year, and that was Madame Restell by Jennifer Wright. I talked about this recently in my December wrap-up, but I will say it again. This book was incredible. It was a difficult read. It was really, really hard to read, but it's so important. And it tells the story of Madame Restell, who was one of New York City's most well-known and most successful and safest abortionists in the 19th century. Her career ended around the 1880s, but it extended further back in time as well. What I loved about this book was not only finding out about Madame Restell herself, how she created this persona for herself, how she was largely self-taught, and yet, by and large, performed very safe operations. Most of her patients lived, or if they did not, it was there was a big gap of time between when she had seen them and when they began to be ill, which points the finger at she didn't cause whatever illness they were now experiencing. There was something else involved. But not only that, also the history around her life and her practice. Jennifer Wright pulls in that history at just the right moments to give you a great amount of context for whatever was going on in the country and how that may have affected Madame Rastel's work. How she was publishing articles that we are still publishing today, arguing for access to safe abortion if you want it, so that more women can live, so that more pressure won't be put on resources and the economic system. She points out a lot of the contrary views, which sometimes are religiously founded, but a lot of the time were either extremely sexist or extremely racist. A lot of people did not like the idea of abortion because they thought that it would decrease the number of white people in America, and that would put whites at a disadvantage, which is total nonsense, as is all racist thought. It pulls up political parties like the Know Nothing Party. I learned about them in AP US history. No one pointed out how similar they are to alt-right conservatives that we have today. Jennifer Wright gets very vulnerable and very open in her epilogue about her own fertility struggles and how that has influenced her view of abortion and everything else that women in this country are dealing with even today, with the overturning of Roe versus Wade, even pre-overturning of Roe versus Wade, the things that women would put themselves through because they did not want to or could not have a child safely, and so doing incredibly unsafe things to themselves because they felt they had no other safe choice. It's horrifying, it's frustrating, it's just awful, but it's so, so important and so perfectly executed. I said this in my wrap-up, but I'll say it again. Whether you are pro-life, whether you are pro-choice, I would encourage you to read this book just to be exposed to so many different points of view. That might change your mind, it might not change your mind, but you need to read this history and these points of view anyway, just to know. And that book, Madame Rastel, will be published in February of 2023. So those were my 5-star reads for 2022. Like I said at the beginning, I read so many incredible books this year that this was just a small sampling. If you're curious for more of my reviews, head over to my Goodreads or Storygraph pages. Both are linked in the description box down below, as well as links to these books in particular. And let me know what were some of your top reads of 2022, or if you have further questions about any of these books that I mentioned. Until next time, be safe, be well, and happy reading. Bye everyone.